It's December. Today is December 9th, 2020, and as you can see from my setting here, it's winter in New England. Ticks are less active in the winter. We know that in New England, in the Northeast. They don't die off in the winter. We know that for sure. They'll be active again in the spring, but there will be less risk, and that has as much to do with our activity as it does with the tick's activity. We don't get outside as much. We bundle up when we do go outside, and so we have less exposure. This year, the decrease in tick activity corresponds to a change in our service as well. So if you visited tickreport.com recently, you'll notice that we're on a temporary hiatus. For the third time this year, we've been forced to furlough staff as a mandatory measure from the University of Massachusetts. But Tick Report will be back very soon, and we're working hard to make sure that the service is interrupted again in the future. I want to thank the Tick Report staff for how hard they've worked all year. They've tested some 15,000 ticks since January 2020 in what has been a very challenging year with not just furloughs, but all the circumstances that we had to work under this year. So I'm very grateful, as I'm sure all of you are, for the hard work that the Tick Report staff does. I assure you that Tick Report service will be back soon enough, and we look forward to entering our 15th year of tick testing and providing this service for the public. Till then, till we see you again, please stay strong and take care of yourselves. Today also is the 12th and final installment of Tick Talk. This is something we've been doing in conjunction with UMass Extension all year long, and actually in our second year now. Tick Talk will be back again in the spring, and we'll have something exciting and different to do for you at that time. But today we're finishing with a bang. I've got a very special guest on Tick Talk. I spent probably almost 3.5 hours talking with today's guest, Dr. Tom Mather of University of Rhode Island. Tom's a fascinating person, just very exhaustive knowledge about ticks and tick-borne diseases. And about the same time that we were starting to create Tick Report in our lab at the University of Massachusetts, he had, a few years before then, created TickEncounter, which is just an amazing resource, online resource for information about ticks and tick-borne diseases. And he's just worked tirelessly for the last couple of decades creating this as a resource, and I point people to it all the time. What we did today with the conversation was I asked Tom to dish out a little bit about how TickEncounter came to be, and what some of his thinking is behind the tools that he presents there. And as you'll see, it's been a very thoughtful process, and it's as much about creating narrative in the science and making the science real for people, so that it's not just good information, but it's a good communication message. So I really enjoyed doing this one. It was great to talk to Tom, who's been a friend and colleague for some time now, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. How are you? Yeah. So when did you start TickEncounter? When did the web page start?
Well, so I can go back a little bit further than that. So I had been in Rhode Island I came here in 1992, and we did our first project really was a statewide tick surveillance. And we found in a few years that there were more black-legged ticks in the southern part of the state and the northern part of the state, and that seemed to go along with where people were getting sick as well. And in fact, we didn't find, Rhode Island's small, but we didn't find black-legged ticks at any of the sites in the northern tier for the first few years. And so we had started making these GIS maps, and that was when I had a postdoc named Matt Nicholson, and he was quite talented in this area. And so we realized that we could identify through
Here in
his
the Northeast, tick bites are slowing down somewhat for the year as
surface
temperatures
created
drop and
maps
ticks
that
become less active.
where the
Remember,
hotspots
ticks don't die
for
off in the
these
winter, and as
ticks,
soon as it warms up
and
again, they'll be active.
could sample in
Also
some of those
remember that tick
places, and
risk
yes,
is as
indeed,
much
they were
about
hot. And
our
so
activity
we
as it is
realized we
about
could
ticks' activity.
go to
We spend our
communities
time
in
outdoors
those
differently in the winter.
general
Most of us were
areas
bundled up at this
and
time of
help
year, and
them,
that changes
because
the way
that
we
was a way of
expose ourselves to
prioritizing
ticks.
putting out
This year, the decrease in
prevention
tick-human
messaging,
interaction slows our
to
activity in the
places where
lab and
people were
coincides
going to
with a
be
brief
at greatest
hiatus in tick
risk.
report and the testing that we
And we
do.
started
If
a
you
little
visited
program, we called it our backyard
www.tickreport.com in
seminar
December, you've
program.
seen the
So
message
we
that
would
we've had to
go
suspend
into a
testing due to
community, we'd find
budget-related staff
somebody
furloughs
willing
across the
to
UMass Amherst campus.
host having
This
us
is
in
the
their
third such
backyard,
furlough
and
this
then
year, and
invite
we're
their
working hard to
neighbors.
make
And
sure that when we resume testing,
sometimes we'd
there'll
have
be no
5
further interruptions
neighbors,
in
and
this service.
sometimes we've had as
I want to
many
thank
as
the Tick Report staff
55
for their hard
neighbors.
work all year. They've
And
tested roughly 15,000
what
ticks
we
since
tried to do
January
then
2020
was to
and have made
link
sure that the
people
quality of our science and our
with
commitment to
needs
service has
with
stayed
people
strong
with
throughout this
services. And so we
very difficult
invited
year.
like the
I know that
cartilage
Tick
tree
Report users
experts to come
appreciate their work
along,
as much as
or
I do, and I look forward to our 15th year
maybe
of testing
people from
human-biting
Bayer
ticks
that
for the
had
public.
products to
For
protect their
until
pets, and we
then,
gave
till
them
we see
all
you
an
again, stay
opportunity
strong,
to
and
talk about their
we
programs
wish the
for
best for you and your
prevention.
families.
And the idea was that, so now you've just introduced me to somebody, I don't have to go sort that out. And oftentimes it was beneficial for them, because they of course got job, prevention opportunities with these people, with these communities. So it kind of broke down the barriers. But we'd often hear, well, do you have a brochure or a website, because my neighbor couldn't come and I think they're going to be interested in that. And so I would say, I have neither a brochure or a website. I don't really believe much in brochures for the most part, because I often see them in trash cans after you've been at an event. And I didn't know how to make a website. And so that was sort of the impetus. We did these backyard things for a couple of years, and then we kept hearing the same thing, that people wanted access to our information for the people that they knew that would like it. And so there was an opportunity to partner with people in computer sciences doing stuff. And so we created a little team and launched TickEncounter in 2006. We had a couple of really inventive younger people on the computer science side that were like, we could have the scientist in his white coat, and he could be doing all of these things. And I was like, that's not, I don't really want to wear a white coat. But the idea was that, they wanted a Bill Nye the Science Guy kind of a thing. That was sort of where it was. And so we probably have a little bit of that. And, it grew, the analytics grew. The first year it was like 40,000 visitors, and then 80,000 visitors, and 120,000 visitors. So over the course of a few years, it sort of incrementally grew, almost in a doubling each year, until I think our peak year we had over 1 million visitors in a year. And a few years ago, we had it on a private server, and then we moved it to the university server for security issues. And the people at the university who monitor all of these things said that in the first month, it was had the second greatest traffic of any website at the university, meaning there was the university's website where students would get their information, and then there was TickEncounter. We're still working, trying to get support to upgrade what we had, because it was on an antiquated platform, and we're trying to move it to more of a WordPress platform now. But all that takes resources, and we're just kind of working at it slowly. We had a good, almost done, and then the pandemic hit, and that kind of slowed everything up. But we're still moving in that direction. I think that'll be a plus. Some of the unique tools that we developed, I think that was one of the things. We had a very creative team doing some kind of neat things, and with some of the tools like the Tick ID page and everything. but now they, a lot of those were built in software that's not really supported any longer, and so that's making it hard. So we have to transition a lot of those things out. But I was really blessed when we did move it to the university, and I finally got the attention of some of the people. They have other things to do, and we clearly are lower on the totem pole. But when they do work, they actually are really quite good at it. And so we're looking forward to some of the new integrated products that have been developed. But I don't want to launch it until they're completely developed, and I'm just waiting for people to find time to finish it up.
Are you familiar with Carl Zimmer, the work of Carl Zimmer, or read the books of David Quammen?
Yeah, David, he's the book that I use in my class.
Mm-hmm. And Carl Zimmer is I guess he's a columnist, though he's written some books as well. And like Quammen, he comes from a journalist background. And, Quammen's book, he's written extensively about zoonotic disease.
Even included you in one of the chapters.
The malaria one, yeah. It seems to me like 25 years ago, those popular pieces were being written by Stephen Jay Gould type folks that were scientists producing the primary information. And now the people that are writing more for the general public aren't necessarily scientists. It seems like not enough scientists either have enough time or bandwidth, like yourself, to blog. So you're a person that generates the data and analyzes the data and writes the primary literature. And it's good for you to have that, for your perspective to be speaking to the general public. I don't think enough people do that. I don't think enough people come out of the ivory tower to take that step. You use the word, I think that's key, is to create narratives, because it's the narrative that knits it all together. If we're just sort of looking at the little pieces of it and not creating the narratives, then it doesn't really sell with the public.
Teaching my students about this, and one of them, for her final project, I had her write a blog. Mm-hmm. She had some talent in that regard, and then I said, if it's all right with you, I can work with you on this, and we'll put it on TickEncounter. And so we kind of passed it back and forth and smoothed it out a little bit. And actually, I think it's quite good. You should look at it. It's called the Tick Hunt. So her final exam was to go on a tick hunt with the tick guy, and she was, quite excited to do that. And we weren't just looking for regular ticks, we were looking for engorged ticks, which is a little bit of a talent. And she, so the story is a nice narrative of someone who's gone in the woods but never knew that there were so many ticks in the woods, and didn't know that you could find deer beds and that you could find ticks in deer beds. And, it was just that she had this, what I liked about her first draft was it was just like this reveal, the sort of the starry-eyed reveal of something that was just, you couldn't imagine, right? And that I had been able to orchestrate that for her. And it just, if I could do that for everybody, I think that they'd come to see their own space and about ticks in a different way. What we often would do in those backyards back in the day is we'd flag for ticks, and I'd say, oh, here's some. And the people you'd never seen people, mostly they would run away from ticks, but they'd come running over to knocking each other over just to see what was on my flag. So there was a lot of pent up curiosity. And it gets back to what you said exactly. Just tell me about my tick. Mm-hmm. And now I was showing them their tick in their backyard. And this is where it comes from. And, when you make that kind of a reveal, I think that that's a very strong piece of building trust. Mm-hmm. They can see it for themselves, even though they didn't imagine that they were going to be that interested. They are very interested. When I take reporters, TV reporters out in the field, they want to meet me in the field. And I say, well, we go and find the ticks just on the twigs, and I love taunting them a little bit. Do you see the tick right there? And they look and look and look, and they can't see it. I said, no, it's right there. Don't you see it? And so then I go down with my finger and touch it, and it gets on my finger. Oh yeah. Most of them won't leave until they find their own tick, and it's not, it's just my eyes. That's probably one of my personal blessings in life, that I've been given the gift to actually be able to see these things. I mean, and just Sunday I collected maybe 600, and they weren't ready to quest yet. I got probably 25 on my pants walking through the woods, and the rest of them I saw. And I would have come home with 25 if I hadn't had that skill to see them.
You see them low in the leaf litter?
No, these are the adults. They're up questing.
Wow. Yeah, I can't do that.
So it's, everybody has been blessed with something, and I've learned that that's probably my true gift, and I might as well use it.
No.
So I'd love to figure out, like, we've taken kids, like we had kids that were in a kids hiking group, and we said, all right, well, let's take them on a tick hike. And so just the place that I brought them, within the first 10 feet, there was tons of ticks on the side of the trail. That gave me my first opportunity for teaching. I said, so if there's that many ticks on each side of the trail, where should you be walking? And they all got it, 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. We should be walking in the middle of the trail. And so the parents were like, oh, okay. We had talked a little bit about wearing tick repellent clothes and everything. And there's no interest until all of a sudden they could see, hey, there's ticks. This trail is 3.5 or 4 feet wide, and there's 10 ticks in the first 10 feet on either side of the trail. Maybe we ought to be paying attention to what this guy is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the kids, we were sort of sauntering on, and the kids' stream of about 12 or 15 kids went single file down the path. They got up to the other end of the trail where we could still see them across the field. And then there was a kiosk, and they were all crowded around the kiosk. And I said to the parents as we walked to catch up, I said, so what do you notice? And every one of them said, they're standing where the ticks are. And it's like that kind of activity and that kind of experience of personalizing it, just like you said, I think we should be doing more of that. And I think that's what, the blog can try and do as well.
Mm-hmm.
But create everyone's own story, give everybody their own story. Health belief model, the biggest piece of that is, I know that I could get sick, and I know that this could be this and this could be bad and everything, but they have to know that they can do it. Is what we've tried to do with TickEncounter and the 5 core actions. I think the biggest one, and the one I spend the most time on, is just knowing the ticks. And why do you need to know them? Because different ticks transmit different germs. And then you could open that whole thing, and that's right at the nexus of the time to transmission and the risk, and what proportion are infected or not infected.
It occurs to me that one of the things that you have to push back against is there's so many sources of misinformation on the internet. Did you imagine, or do you imagine now, that TickEncounter is a place to correct some of that without maybe taking it on head on? But
yeah, I feel like there's so much mistrust of scientists for some reason or another by a large portion of the population. Yet what I see at TickEncounter is a bunch of grateful people that someone is telling them straight. We need to know more about ticks and the diseases that they can transmit and the specificity of it, because I was pointing out that different ticks transmit different germs, and that you can't just make these sort of broad-based statements without giving people misinformation so that they don't feel it's important to know what kind of tick it is, because any tick can give them any germ anytime. When I do my continuing ed with veterinary clinics, you can get a lot of help just by knowing what kind of tick it is, so that when you go to consider potential diagnoses and risks and everything, you have at least a basis for that. And yeah, I mean, if it is that there's too much variability and that sometimes there are these germs and sometimes there aren't, then it would be harder. But so far, at least, the data suggests that it's pretty clear cut that different ticks do transmit different germs. And so I think that then becomes a valuable learning opportunity to know what the types of ticks are. So I thought it would be a good idea to just think of some practical examples of the things that we've been talking about a little bit, in terms of communicating risks and real science about ticks to folks that need to know. They clearly need to know. And I thought I'd give you a tour of some of the highlights of TickEncounter. Here's something that I think is real relevant for this time of year. Most people think that tick season should be over, especially even though we haven't had a frost yet. Maybe some of you have, and people think that the first frost should kill everything that sucks blood. Certainly mosquitoes do die, but ticks don't. In fact, it's one of the things that seems to bring the adult stage black-legged ticks out. And so just when you thought tick season was over, and most people do right now think that it should be over, it's actually just starting for the adult stage black-legged ticks. And so that's the type of thing that we feel like we have to help people to reveal what's going on for them. I'd like to start with a picture like this. There's probably hundreds of thousands of miles of roads just like this in just the Northeast and Middle Atlantic states. And one day I was driving along this road. It happens to be the road between my office and my home. And I decided to pull over. I had stopped there before and hadn't really necessarily found ticks there, even though it looked like there should be ticks. And I always ask people, do you see the ticks in this picture? And they laugh, like, how could they see the ticks in this picture? But they're there. In fact, those are adult stage black-legged ticks, and they were within, if we go back, they were right on this piece of grass right there. Just the place where if you were walking your dog down that road, you might brush against them, or if you stopped when you were riding your bicycle to fix, adjust your helmet or something like that, your foot would probably be right there. And it wasn't just that piece of grass where so I walked from this telephone pole up to the next telephone pole, just on the pavement, looking for ticks. And I didn't find quite this many, but I did find in that particular spot about 50 in about 20 yards. 50 ticks in 20 yards, a foot from the pavement. And it could have been, that's just an unusual place. So I started going around and doing the same thing. And I stopped at 20 places in southern Rhode Island and found adult black-legged ticks at 19 of the 20. The most I found was 125 ticks in 20 yards at these spots. And that is where the light bulb went off for me. And I thought, geez, there seems to be ticks in more places, and more ticks this year in more places. And so that's really a phenomenon that happens. There aren't always more ticks, but there certainly are ticks in more places now than there were a decade ago and 2 decades ago. And we could get into another discussion about the reasons for the ticks in more places. But the fact is that there are ticks in more places and people are encountering them. And so I think it's a problem. Anytime that there are people getting sick and it's associated with something like, in this case, ticks, and there are more ticks in more places, or at least ticks in more places, I think it's a public health problem that needs to be addressed. I think everyone knows something about ticks. But oftentimes what they know or what they feel they know is just wrong enough. And by being just wrong enough, it sort of leads them down maybe wrong paths for taking appropriate science-based strategies to prevent tick bites, or best next actions is what we call them. And this is a place where I'd like to kind of jump off because I actually wrote a blog about this and it's on TickEncounter. So I'm going to escape this screen and I'm going to, here's our TickEncounter website. This was the lead picture, sort of has got some seasonal messages. This was from spring, then we had summer. This was something that we can get into in a second, but this is the fall picture. And it's like, you didn't see this coming because you didn't necessarily know that tick season actually wasn't over, but the adult stage ticks were coming. And so one of the things that I like to point out is right here in this blog section. So I try to write seasonal messages that go with those seasonal banner pictures. And we did write one right here, just wrong enough is what I called it. And so being just wrong enough, it came from a story. I was actually being interviewed by a TV station in Baltimore, and the guy was like, oh, well, what do you want to talk about? And I knew that I wanted to talk about whatever he had written on his teleprompter. And so I said, well, whatever's probably written on your teleprompter is what we'll talk about. And he said, no. And, we had about 4 minutes before we went live on air. And I said, it just popped into my head. I said, well, everybody knows something about ticks, but generally speaking, what they know is just not necessarily altogether wrong, but it's just wrong enough that if they follow that path of logic, they're going to end up doing probably something that's not going to help protect them from ticks. And he said, I don't understand what you mean. I said, well, you tell me 2 things that you know about ticks. And he said, well, they drop out of trees onto your head and they die in the winter. And I said, and if you believe that, the actions that you would take is you'd put a permethrin-treated hat on, which wouldn't really do you very much good. And if they all died in the winter, where would next year's ticks come from? And he sort of scratched his head for a second. He said, that's what we should talk about. Now, we did not talk about that. We talked about what was on his teleprompter. But, it made me think, all right. And so that when I came home, I started, and the story is right here. You can read that in the blog. And, talking about, and we've seen it in so many cases. Well, I thought ticks died in the winter, right? And here's an example, this picture. It was taken in Vermont of a tick that had dropped off of a coyote. It turned out the person was tracking coyote's tracks, and they came across a stump where the coyote had been sitting, and then this tick had detached right at that point, and it was, still quite alive, and proved that, there was probably a foot of snow on the ground. How did that coyote get that tick and get it to be fed 5 or 6 days later like that if they died in the winter? And so it was kind of a good evidence for that. So anyway, this blog section tries to talk about things that are current, generally speaking, with the seasonal message on the front. And so this is the tick hunt. I thought it's a guest blog by one of my students. And this is what's running currently because it goes along with the fact that the adult stage ticks are active now, and it talks a little bit about, so instead of catching unfed ticks, I thought we'd give her a treat, and we went looking for, there were plenty of unfed ticks along the way, but we were looking for fed ticks in deer beds. And you can find them if you can find deer beds. So here's a picture of a deer bed. You can see the deer hair right there. And if you just sort the leaves out, oftentimes you'll find the engorged ticks that have dropped off the deer. Now, what's the importance of that for me teaching a student? It really kind of hammered home. You can tell people the life cycle of the tick, but when you actually see exactly where Lyme disease starts as adult stage ticks dropping off in the forest, and we didn't just find one, we found 7. And so if you multiply 7 times about 2,500 eggs, you got 17,000 ticks in one little spot in the forest. And you can just imagine that there's lots of spots like that in the forest, because studies have shown that deer rest 70% of the time, especially unless they're in their rut. And so that's right about now. There's a lot of deer resting in the forest, and these ticks are engorging and dropping off in these spots. So when those adult stage ticks lay their eggs, next summer, those eggs hatch and the larvae come out, and any poor unwitting mouse or chipmunk that runs right through that spot's not going to find just one. They're going to be exposed to potentially a lot of larval ticks, and that's what happens. And those mice, or chipmunks in particular, but birds as well, then feed some of these ticks, and that's where the germs come from. So just by this kind of an example, we were able to help teach students, but people reading the blog can learn a little bit more about sort of the life cycle of ticks as well, in a hopefully a narrative way. And that's one of the strategies that we have. So examples of other blogs that I'm very, I thought hit home. Here's a current one that is interesting, I think. Moose ticks, but no moose. So moose ticks, Dermacentor albopictus. Many of you probably have heard that they can exsanguinate moose, and the moose are taking it on the chin further north because of this tick. And it turned out that last year we encountered these ticks in Rhode Island. I had seen them occasionally on some of the Elizabeth Islands where I'd worked back 25 years ago. And here's the larvae. This moose tick, or it's also known as the winter tick, is a one-host tick, so it's a different kind of tick. It gets on its host as a larva, and it stays on that same host through the nymph and the adult stage. It doesn't drop off like black-legged ticks do. So it's a little bit weird, not really representing much of a risk for disease to people, because it doesn't like to feed on people. It likes to feed on moose or elk or deer. But this was just to show you the kind of surprise, and this blog talks about this. So this is a moose tick, adult female, and these are moose tick, adult females as well. And you can see that there's two different forms, and I didn't even know this as a medical entomologist. They're both called Dermacentor albopictus, but they used to be two different species, and then somebody decided that they were really the same species and just two different variants. So you can see there's pigment on the scutum of this one, but no pigment on this. So there's an ornate form, that's this form, and then there's an inornate form. And it turns out this one, the size difference between these two ticks is quite dramatic as far as I'm concerned. And it turns out that this is the one that often is responsible for biting moose further north from here. And this one tends to be more common on deer and horses in the south, but maybe also here in New England. So I hadn't seen this for 15 years in collecting ticks. I collect a lot of ticks every fall, and they should have been there. Then all of a sudden, last year, I started finding a lot of these. I was getting those clumps of larvae on my pants as I walk through the woods. I work with deer hunters, and they shooting deer, and they had these other odd ticks. So of course they had black-legged ticks on their deer, but then they had these kind of plain-looking ticks that I didn't actually know what they were. Here's an example of what they look like on the deer. This was a nymph, and this nymph actually molted and became this adult female. And they lay eggs off the host, but then those eggs hatch and the larvae get in a nice big clump, and then they get on the host, not just one or two, usually 1,000. And that's how it all starts. But anyway, there's a story about that. So it was, again, I tried to write it as a narrative, and it talks a little bit about the history of it. But if you aren't familiar with things like this, our blog section tries to reveal to people that are interested, more about the ticks that they might encounter and where they might encounter them, or unusual things. Here was one that I kind of liked. Here are ticks on this chicken. Well, most people will say, I don't have ticks because I have chickens. The chickens eat ticks. Well, here's a case where the ticks were eating the chickens. And it wasn't just any kind of tick. These turned out to be Asian Longhorn ticks from a small backyard chicken farmer in Pennsylvania. And so this just talks about the story related to it. But it was quite unusual. She was having, a lot of these. It wasn't just one or two. She had them all summer. And then finally she sent some to us through our Tick Spotters program, and we identified them. And it turned out, this was using our crowdsourced platform that I'm going to talk about in a second, that this was the first time these ticks had been found biting chickens. So it was a host record for Asian Longhorn ticks. And it was a county record because this was from Chester County, Pennsylvania, and there hadn't been those ticks found in that county yet. So we had, through using the crowdsourced program of citizens finding ticks and reporting them, we got both a county record and a host record for this ticks. And this blog actually was, surprisingly, a lot of people must be interested in backyard chickens, because it was probably our most read blog that I've written, so very popular. So that's a little bit about the blog section. Hopefully you want to take a look at that and see some of those stories. They're generally easy to read, I think, and you might find them interesting. One of the most popular pages is our tick identification page, and it doesn't work as well as I'd like it to work right now. We're in the process of revising it, but generally it looks like this. But what happens now, it was built in Flash, which was an Adobe product that seems to be not supported. So there, when you first turn it on, there will be a little thing. Do you want to download Flash to your computer? And you might say, I don't want to download anything to my computer because I don't know what it is. But it's okay to download the Flash, and then you'll get an interactive page like this. If you don't trust that, there's a non-Flash version that's not interactive, but you can still get the same pictures. The value of the Flash version, if I can get it to come back, is that you can see real, life size as well as bigger than life size pictures of these ticks. And if you click on them, you can get more information. You can even look at the bottom side of it if you want. So it's fairly interactive. People really seem to like this. We find it even useful even now. It's oftentimes when we get ticks sent to us in Tick Spotters, which I'll talk about next, people seem to not necessarily know the top of the tick from the bottom of the tick. So we get probably almost 20% of the submissions are the bottom of a tick, and it's a little bit harder sometimes for us to tell what they are when we have to look at the bottom of a tick, because there's not the same distinctive features that you can see on the top side of the tick. You can see that. Anyway, so I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go up to the Tick Spotters program. And so this is something that we interact actually with UMass on, because oftentimes people might want to have their tick tested as well. And so we think UMass does a fine job with their tick report program. And so people will send us a picture of the tick. We usually respond in less than a day. And then they have an idea of what they should do next, because one of the things that we do is we suggest that this is this kind of tick. It's been attached for this long. And in your area, so we have a zip code. You can see people fill out their zip code down here. And so we know, generally speaking, what the infection rate of those types of ticks are and how long it's been attached, so we can give them some guidance as to what they might want to do next. And oftentimes they'll want to have the tick tested to see if their tick was infected. And so this has led to us having tens of thousands of records over the 6 years that we've been doing this, from all over, not just the United States, but all over North America. And we actually have been more recently getting quite a few submissions from some of the European countries as well. We had one last week from Brazil. A little harder. I'm not an expert on ticks in Brazil to tell what they are from pictures, but be surprised sometimes you can sort of, well, dig a little bit deeper in the literature and find out what the most likely common tick is. So we do well with common ticks. We probably don't get all of them exactly right, but we did do a study with Tick Report where we shared the same person's tick. Tick Report got it and could test it molecularly to identify it. And it turned out that we were right about 98% of the time just by looking at the pictures. So looking at pictures is a quick first step in helping to identify what kind of tick and what likely risk comes from it. So that's our Tick Spotters program in a nutshell. Some of the other things that are on this tick identification page I think are really useful for people that want to try and help themselves. So I mentioned with Tick Spotters we can tell about how long a tick has been attached, and people are like, well, how do you know that? Because one of the things that we've learned is that most people think, or they want to think, that their tick hadn't been attached for very long because they feel like they are clean people and they check themselves, or they wouldn't have missed it for 3 days. Certainly they would have found it already. But one of the things that you can see is that ticks change their appearance the longer they're attached in a fairly uniform way. And if your tick looks like this or like this, it hasn't been attached for a day and a half. It's been attached for 3 or 4 days. And this shocks people, really. They probably one of the biggest reveals of the whole Tick Spotters program is how long the tick has been attached. The number of people that put down, well, maybe a day, or, it doesn't look like it's been feeding. They just don't have any experience with it. And using charts like this, and we have these charts for adult stage ticks, nymphal stage ticks, dog ticks, Lone Star ticks, Lone Star tick nymphs. So the common ticks that people likely get, you can match up how the ticks change and about how long they've been attached. Now, why does that matter? Well, it turns out that for a lot of the germs that ticks carry, they don't transmit them efficiently, at least not an infectious dose right away. But over time, the longer they're attached and feeding, the more likely they will have transmitted an infectious dose of the germs that they're carrying. And so it's really important, so if it looks like this, it probably hasn't had enough time to transmit, for instance, the Lyme disease germ or the Babesia germ. But when it looks like this, pretty much it has transmitted, if it was an infected tick, an infectious dose. And so that makes this tick much riskier than this tick. But you could also have the ticks tested and determine if they were infected or not. So that's sort of how you could use some of these tools, I would say. We have other information. There's a lot of frequently asked questions here. They're kind of categorized like this. Here's one that I find really interesting. Let me get to it. So a lot of times people will see this. This is a nymphal stage Lone Star tick. This is what it looks like on top. This is often what it looks like on bottom. And they'll say to me something about, oh, my tick had a white spot, but it was on its underside. And they thought that the spot on Lone Star ticks were on the top. Well, you can see that on nymphs, there's no spot. It's only on the adult female. So nymphs don't have pigment on their scutum. Adult Lone Star ticks do. This white spot, notice it's associated with the tick's anus. And so that's just waste products from the blood digestion accumulating in the tick's rectum. And it just turns out it turns it white. Now, all ticks generally will do this over time, but it seems like Lone Star ticks do this quite quickly, even while the tick is feeding. And so it's very common for even a partially fed Lone Star tick to have guanine in its rectum, which shows up just like this. And so you can see this is how we sort of get at what people think they know about ticks. They think Lone Star ticks have to have a white pigment. And then when this is what actually happens, then we can explain it for them. And so we try to set, you don't know how many times we've had people say, well, how could it be a Lone Star tick? My doctor said they would have a white spot on the top. Well, that's true if it was an adult stage female Lone Star tick, but this is still a nymphal stage Lone Star tick. So the frequently asked questions can oftentimes they come from, people's. This is a six-legged larva. It feeds, it molts, starts to molt, and what comes out of that is a nymph, but it's an eight-legged nymph. And so, again, it's just things people think they know about ticks, but maybe don't really know. And we try to break it down and explain it for them. Let's just go back up to the top again. So that's like the frequently asked questions. These are all some of the more popular things. We talked a little bit about 5 core actions. And so that's under our TickSmart program right now. So knowing the types of ticks that are active throughout the year where you live, performing daily tick checks, making your clothes tick repellent, treating your yard, and protecting your pet. Those are the 5 things that we'd like people to do. When I give outreach talks, we find that most people aren't consistent with doing any of them. Probably the thing that they say the most, that they're most consistent about, is doing daily tick checks. A lot of times, I may have mentioned this already, I ask them, well, what does that look like? And they hold up their arms and they look at their arms and, as if they're checking their arms, but that's not the best way to do a daily tick check. And so we have things, I think, probably on the home page. We have a video here about doing a daily tick check. You can do a fairly effective daily tick check in about 30 or 40 seconds. And sometimes you can combine looking in the mirror for the top part of your body. If you can't, lean over and look, we have actually, you have to sort of go around, but we have some products here. And one of the products is a card. You could put this right by your toilet to remind you that if you can't lean over and look, you can lean over while you're sitting on the toilet and look at your groin, behind your knees, down your legs. Makes it easy to look. If you go regularly, then you're doing a daily tick check. So it's kind of people would be like laughing about this, but it's actually quite effective. Generally speaking, that's how I do my tick checks these days, because if I lean over and look in a mirror, I actually get dizzy and my glasses fall off my head, and I'm too old to do that any longer. So we have a lot of information here, maybe too much information in some cases. Under the prevention tab, there's ways to protect yourself. We talk about treating your clothes with insecticide, permethrin. There's information about that, how you can send your clothes in to a company called Insect Shield, and they'll do it for you.
Tom, how does the information on TickEncounter, how would it accord with the information that's on, for example, the CDC page or your state's health department page? Or
well, some of that information will be kind of the same. I think that the information on TickEncounter probably goes that one step further. So we talked about how did we get started. We tried to connect people in backyards in our backyard program, and we matched up people with that needed a tick expert with people that were experts in different aspects of controlling and preventing tick bites. And we sort of carried that forward in our website, trying to, again, be more specific. I think you have to just be more specific for people. If we could hand them the permethrin spray, they would spray it on their shoes. But if you remove that opportunity, even one point, by saying you've got to go to the store and buy it and then spray it, that's enough of an impediment to keep people from doing it. So we actually, some of our outreach activities, will do it for you and show you. Sometimes in some towns where we've done this, we've done it at a hardware store, so that the hardware store is stocking the product inside. We'll show you on one pair of shoes. If you want to treat the rest of the family shoes, go in there and buy it and do exactly what we just showed you. So try to break down this thing. So it's not really, I don't understand it. So if we go back to that health belief model, people have to believe that they can do it. And in order for them to believe that they can do it, I think we have to show them. And so a lot of what we've tried to do on TickEncounter that I don't think other places really do is to give them confidence that they can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we often hear people saying, I'll go and give a talk and I'll give what I think is a decent summary of the biology of it. And then people will be at the end and they'll just say, just give me a list. Just tell me the things I need to do. Give me a checklist.
Yeah, that's a common thing I would often hear as well when in the early days, Doc, just tell me what I need to know when I need to know it. And it's like, okay, so that's why what's different about TickEncounter, if we go to the homepage, this banner, this lead banner, is seasonally relevant. And a lot of our tools also have a geographic relevance because so ticks have, vary by season and they vary by geography. So one of the things is this current tick activity guide. And, with the data that you generate from Tick Report, you could be doing, and maybe you do these things too, but this is right now, we're in this time period. So every 2 weeks we change it, and you can see the map. You can get information from any area of the country, and it changes. So what's going on in New England right now, black-legged tick adults are the most active, so the most prevalent, highlighted in red. You can see you're talking about this area. But if we go to the mountain states, you can see that the brown dog tick is really the only tick, and this is largely because they are showing up mostly in Arizona. We have a real hot spot of brown dog ticks down in this area of Arizona. And that would be the most common tick you would get there. Different tick, different germs being transmitted. If we were to go to the Pacific Coast states, you can see they have brown dog ticks. Pacific Coast ticks they're going out of their season now. These ticks are just coming into their season now out there. So it changes depending on where you are. You can see there's still some Gulf Coast tick activity in the southeastern United States. But they also have black-legged ticks there, and they're becoming active as well. And this is, I think, what's useful about this. We've added these little red buttons so you could project. So let's say you don't care about this, but you're going to Florida in January. Well, these are the likely ticks you're going to encounter in Florida in January, black-legged ticks, and importantly, these brown dog ticks. And then if you take your dog and then you bring your dog back home, it could come home with brown dog ticks. And so this is one of the things that we see through tick spotters. People will bring brown dog ticks from the south, where they're more common, up to where they live in the north and get a household infestation. And so you really need, how do you prevent that? Well, you make sure that your dog is wearing a preventer. Even though it's winter in New England and the tick activity is lower, you go to the south, the tick activity is higher. And so this becomes a very useful tool.
You just touch on something that I think comes up a lot about household infestation. So most ticks wouldn't lend themselves to a household infestation. This might be an exception, right, in the case of the brown dog tick.
Yeah, brown dog ticks, often infest kennels where you might kennel your dog, or people's homes, and it takes a while to get started. The worst case I saw was someone in Central Falls, Rhode Island. Actually, they had traveled to Florida to pick up a fancy pants dog down there in January, and they called us in July. So it took them 6 months or so to really get a full-blown infestation in their home. And it was something I had never witnessed. We turned the sofa over in the sitting room, and it was just seething with adult ticks. I mean, they knew they had a problem. I mean, the boyfriend was sitting on the couch, and he was flicking ticks off the arm of the couch. And, the floor was wet with spray, various kinds of spray. There were sprays in all the windowsills in this room, and the ticks were just trudging right through it because it wasn't the right kind of spray.
Mm-hmm.
They had tried products that were like insect growth regulators or whatever, and it was like, well, so again, this was a great opportunity. Let's identify the problem and let's connect people with the right solutions so that they can live a little bit tick-freer life.
The communication piece in particular, there's so much opportunity for seeing the feedback, like just the FAQs that you're going through. Like the learning process for us was most people don't know what they don't know. And so the FAQs are a way of revealing things that people need to be educated about that we wouldn't even have thought that people needed to be told about.
Right.
Some things seem absurd to us from our standpoint, but there's clearly a need, and you see it when you hear the same question again and again.
Right. I mean, that's the thing that I always say about tick spotters is that when we first started it, we didn't think of it this way at all. We didn't see it as a portal to a tick expert. We saw it as people just sending us their experience with ticks. Then we started realizing that more than just a picture, they were sending us a little bit more information about their experience with ticks. And it really became eye-opening what they didn't know. Like you appreciated, I think that, that immediately, if we listen more and talk less, we can learn a lot of the basic things. So, while a lot of our colleagues, are sitting there inventing the next miracle cure, I realize that most people don't even know, the top from the bottom side of a tick, and
right.
How important that is if you want help, or that it is a tick at all. I actually have been shocked. The most common tick lookalike is something called a spider beetle. Now, I've been trained as an entomologist since 1980. I had never seen a spider beetle. I have seen more spider beetles by people submitting their ticks, and I've learned it almost always comes that they were found on their sheets in their bed or in the bathroom in the tub. And so it turns out that spider beetles like linen closets and bathrooms. Well, go figure. I mean, I still haven't seen one in my house. Now, I had also never seen a pseudoscorpion. Those are fairly common tick lookalikes as well. And, our response is, wow, if that was a tick, those are nasty looking claws, aren't they? It's like, wow. But I did actually find one in my underneath the Oriental rug in my living room once. Apparently they're there, but again, that was not something I exactly knew either. But these are, things that people think are ticks, and we can help them, right? So we can help guide them towards better knowledge about these things. And by doing that, then immediately when people learn that what they sent wasn't a tick, you'd think that they would be embarrassed. Mostly they aren't. They're so grateful that they can get off of that. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard the response, now my wife can sleep tonight.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Great.
So all because we provided a portal to a tick expert.
Yeah.
Where are you going to find a tick expert these days? You'd have to drive over to Amherst to find you, or, You know, there's Joellen Lampman in the New York extension or something, but you know, most people don't know how to find a tick expert these days. And so I think this kind of sort of activity is really very valuable, especially in a more ticks in more places world. You need a tick expert now more than ever, right?
Well, thanks for not one, but two meetings now.
Yeah, it's fine. It was nice spending time with you again, Steve.
Good to catch up.